Okay, this is for the US 48 750 watt. Oh, okay.
Good morning, everyone. This is Julie McDonald with Microcom Technologies, and I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar with Peplink. Today's host is Jason. He's the technical trainer in the sales and marketing department. And if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the question box, and I'll ask Jason, and he'll answer them at the end of today's presentation. Jason, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate your time and your presentation. And I am finished for now, so go ahead and take it on over.
Sounds good, Julie. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Jason Kropp. I'm one of the technical trainers here with Peplink, and today we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on our Speed Fusion technology. Speed Fusion, of course, at its most basic level, gives you the ability to tap in the bandwidth of up to 13 internet connections, pipe it down a bonded connection, giving you ultra-fast and budget-friendly connectivity, which is easily configurable to suit any real network environment. Here's how we do it. Traffic hits the tunnel from the WAN side and is broken up on the packet level, sent across to the other end, and if we do have a WAN failure subsession, we do have the ability to route around it immediately and seamlessly. Packets then hit the other side of the tunnel, re-encrypted, and taking advantage with what we bring to the table. Before we really kind of get too deep into the nuts and bolts, I do want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as terminology is concerned. Where everything starts is our PEP VPN. This is kind of the baseline level where everything builds off of. This allows you to build, technically speaking, a ISP or carrier independent private network. Because this is routing LAN to LAN, we aren't really hitting the internet at all when it comes to that point. This is included on all our Peplink PepWave products, and because it uses the same engine as full-on Speed Fusion, it is absolutely compatible with the other gear. Up to the next step is what we call hot failover or session persistence. What this means is, as I had mentioned a moment ago, if during a session one of the WANs that you have tasked to the tunnel does fail, we do have the ability to route around it immediately. Because this is a always-on connection from Peplink to Peplink, there's no middleware client needed. It's all part and parcel of the gear, and along those lines, there's not a subscription attached to the service at all. If you have the box, you have access to the tag. Next up is kind of our bread and butter, WAN aggregation or full-on bonding. What this does is allow you to tie connections together. 2 plus 2 gets you about 3.6, 3.7, losing a little bit off of the top for maintenance and upkeep of the tunnel. And you can use this really a number of ways. This is a very common MPLS replacement solution, saving you a lot of money immediately because you're migrating away from those more expensive connections, or even using it to augment your existing network in place. Because this is available on all our products that do support full-on Speed Fusion, both the Balance and the Max, we're really blurring the lines a bit between the Ethernet connections, fixed line, and mobile lines, because we can get you the same throughput no matter the input method. Finally, we talk about WAN smoothing. What this is real-time application protection. What that means is that we're kind of sacrificing aggregation for consistency. So rather than 2 plus 2 gives you 3.6, 3.7, we usually say 2 plus 2 gives you a hard 2. This is really QoS for your best effort links, and it does deliver SLA grade services right away. To get a little deeper into it, hot failover, the way it works is it's again a Peplink to Peplink connection And what we're doing is we do establish the tunnel on all active links, but we only send the traffic across one of the WANs at any given time. But if a WAN fails during the session, this is where we route around it because we already have those other connections tied to the tunnel, giving you seamless application handoff. Bonding is a little different. This goes in much the same, Peplink to Peplink, breaking it up on the packet level as it hits the tunnel, and what we're doing is we're splitting that session across all active internet connections. Now again, aggregation is the end goal here, but you do have to be smart about it. Certain link combinations just honestly aren't realistic because you are losing a little bit off of the top from encryption and upkeep of the VPN. If you do try to bond disparate connections together, the math alone can bring down the overall speed of speed fusion. So the rule of thumb is using similar speed, similar latency connections to take full advantage of bonding. Much like hot failover, it is absolutely part and parcel of the bonding equation as well, routing around a downed WAN sub-second to give you that ever so much closer to 100% uptime. WAN smoothing a little different. So we are still doing it Peplink to Peplink, but rather than breaking up the session and sending it across all active WANs, we're actually sending redundant copies of the traffic across each of the connections. And what we do is we use the one that arrives first at the other end. Much like the other versions of Speed Fusion, hot failover, absolutely part and parcel with this connection. And where this more so comes into play over aggregation is where you need to optimize traffic to get a more stable latency, jitter, less packet loss, VoIP, video streams, etc. Once you have the tunnel up and running and are passing data across it, this is where things get very fun. Because Peplink treats the SpeedFusion VPN in essence as a virtual WAN connection, it does allow you to start to apply what we call split tunneling to the connection. If you want to route particular applications through the tunnel, you can make a rule within the UI to do so. By default, once the tunnel is up and running, the remote subnets are automatically broadcast to the other end. Everybody knows where everybody is at. And if you have traffic destined for that remote subnet, there's nothing more you need to do. It will take the tunnel automatically as the WAN to get there. But where this comes into play is if you're looking to tie other types of traffic or tie everything to go through the tunnel, you can set outbound policy to do so quickly and easily. All right, so how do we set things up? First off, requirements. You do need at least 2 SpeedFusion capable units, which would be the minimum for bonding or smoothing. PetVPN, of course, available on all our models. For, again, bonding or smoothing, the Peplink Balance does support this from the 210 on up, but the Balance one does have the SpeedFusion as an upgrade purchase or an unlock. Our Max line of products, both the HD and the Max 700 series, absolutely supports full-on SpeedFusion. The Transit is again available as an unlock, and the BR series is definitely capable of PetVPN hot failover. And then finally, of course, our virtual instance, the Fusion Hub, can be used as a virtual Peplink to terminate the tunnel against as well. We do also need at least one public IP on one of the connections in play. That's what we're going to build the tunnel towards. Static is ideal, but we don't have to have it. What you can do is if you have a dynamic public IP, just simply register that address with one of our supported DDNS services or even our own internal Find My Peplink. And we can terminate the tunnel, SpeedFusion tunnel, to that host name that you've set up. A quick aside here on Fusion Hub before we really get into it. Again, Fusion Hub is our virtual SpeedFusion appliance that we offer. And with Fusion Hub, you can go ahead and terminate SpeedFusion connections between various cloud servers and physical Peplink devices. This allows you to go ahead and bring in and integrate those cloud server data centers into your existing network. You can see the web domains your clients visit, the applications they use, etc. Benefits it brings to the table is allows you to deploy globally in minutes. Because this is a virtual instance that you're putting on a server, this is also going to eliminate reliance on those physical sites. This giving you greater control over your infrastructure. The full-on features of Speed Fusion absolutely available when using Fusion Hub as one of the points, split tunneling up on policy, etc. And you could, of course, also use those public IPs in play for the tunnel establishment, as well as port forwarding inbound services. Fusion Hub runs on a number of platforms at this point, Microsoft Azure, AWS, GCE, and a variety of VMware instances. We do have the information on the site, as well as the ability to grab a demo instance if you want to go ahead and try it before you buy it. Through In Control. All right, to set things up, we do have this available both at the organization level, which is, of course, between two groups to the account, two or more groups, rather, as well as a group level where we're looking for more of that device-to-device information. We support all the common deployments, hub and spoke, fully mesh, point-to-point. And to get things started, you just merely log into your account in IC2. At the organization and group level, you're just hitting that PepVPN Speed Fusion section and clicking on Configure. Next screen, it's just Add Profile, and then deciding the topology that we're going to put into play. If we're doing a hub and spoke deployment, you're choosing what your midpoint is going to be, as well as the endpoints in play. And both for the point-to-point and fully meshed, you're merely choosing everybody who's going to participate in that profile. We then get to our profile setup, and you'll see we do support all of the same applications and options that you do by doing things manually through the UI. Simply save changes once you got things set up, and then you'll be able to push that profile down to the task devices. Once you're up and running, you can certainly keep an eye on things both on a map GPS view, or if it does get too busy, we do have a network diagram logical instance that you can view things as well. For the manual configuration, it's pretty simple. Step one, we're just making sure that we have that local ID assigned for the particular unit. The local ID is just a keyword that you're tying to the unit that ideally will be easier to type than the full-on serial number, etc. Go ahead and grab that new profile and fill in the appropriate information as needed. Name the profile, enter the remote ID of the remote Peplink. Now just keep in mind the remote ID is going to be the local ID of the other endpoint. And then we're putting in the applicable IP or DNS host names, save and apply changes, and away you go. Now by default, we're looking to deploy things in an aggregation profile, and you do that with the LAN connection priority information. By default, they're all set to the same priority. And that means we're going to try to use them equally within the tunnel. Now, if you're looking for other ways to deploy, for example, just more so looking for that uptime or session persistence, you're designating your main lanes and then dialing the priority of the others down to a lower priority. That way, if the main WAN goes down, you route over to the secondary ones sub-second. That's the basics as far as setting up Speed Fusion. Let's take a look at some of the more esoteric portions. First off, one of the new features that we've added in and on our new firmware builds is the allowed shared remote ID. What this does is allow you to speed up deployments of hub and spoke, for example. What this does is allow you to add multiple remote IDs to the same Speed Fusion profile. So instead of setting up a new profile every time you light up a new location, just go ahead and add the remote ID of the Peplink router here to get up and running. NAT Mode comes into play again for a multi-site deployment where you have the same subnet in play on both sides. Of course, by default, this is going to cause an IP route conflict. But what NAT Mode allows you to do is it assigns an IP address from the local or hub site to the remote peers, and then that remote side traffic is going to go through the VPN and be NATed to the local IP. So one drawback of that, of course, is because we're doing a NAT, the clients behind the remote Peplink are going to stay invisible to the main site. We're seeing, again, everything NATed to that IP address, but it is a very a quick and easy way to get around routing confusion, same subnet deployments. Cost is a way to have multiple concurrent tunnels up and running, but to still decide who is getting routed where. You're assigning a cost to the particular SpeedFusion profile, and in a nutshell, the higher the cost, the less preferable the route. Traffic is going to get routed through the profile with the lowest cost in play. Here's an example diagram. So we have site A, B, and C set up. A and B are set up with a cost of 10. A and C are set up with a cost of 30. So in this deployment, if the AB site is up and running, that's where traffic is going to be sent through. If that does go down, we're going to go through AC. Data port is what we use to set the tunnel up. By default, of course, it's UDP 4500, and 32015 will be used TCP if 4500 isn't available. But if you do know you run into issues where only particular ports from the carrier are getting screened out, or you want to do it for greater security, you can certainly set up things on a custom port of whatever you like, really. Bandwidth limitation allows you to define upload and download speeds to each peer on the end of the tunnel. LAN smoothing we talked about earlier, but this is where you go ahead and set things up. So with the drop-down box here, you'll be able to do basically one time, two time, or three times redundant packets. So what it does is the higher you crank things up, of course, it does add a bit of overhead to the tunnel because we're sending a lot more data through accordingly. So again, it's instead of one packet for the session going through, we'd be sending 2 or 3 through to make sure that everything is getting to the other side and discarding the duplicates once it's rebuilt. The receive buffer is kind of more so a video streaming offshoot. So what it does is it helps to reduce out of order packets and minimize jitter on the session, but it does introduce latency to the tunnel. Default is 0 milliseconds, which disables things, and you can crank it up to 2000 milliseconds depending on the need for the application. Now, we do generally recommend if you're sending VoIP or TCP traffic through the tunnel, don't enable this feature because, again, those kind of applications are fairly sensitive to latency swings. Now we dig really deep into what SpeedFusion is capable of here. These next group of settings are going to be found under the help icon for WAN connection priority once you get into the tunnels, the profile setup. Asymmetric connections allows you to go ahead and task a specific WAN in the tunnel profile to be used only for upload or download. This comes into play a lot for WAN connections like an ADSL, for example, that are going to have, they're not synchronous, 75 down, 3 up, or the like. Once you enable the feature, it's just a case of dialing the particular WAN to how you want it used. By default, we are upload and download, but you can go ahead and adjust accordingly. Connection mapping. What this does is allows you to force a particular WAN to one of the remote WANs on the other side, and it will only connect to the WAN you select. Now, it started out being a single WAN, but on current firmware, we actually loosened it up a little bit, allowing you to do a many-to-one. Now, this comes into play when that point-to-point performance, tunnel performance between the particular connections aren't doing well when they try to use everything at once, but it works better, it has a better connection to a particular one on the other side. And you would just go ahead and run the particular PEP VPN test accordingly, send traffic through, note your results, and adjust accordingly. Once you have it enabled, again, you'll see the ability, it'll open up the drop-down menu here to go ahead and define things. Cutoff latency. So what this does is it allows you to assign a threshold, a latency threshold to a particular WAN. And if we go past that, any tunnels using that WAN are going to be suspended until we swing back underneath. Now, when the when the WAN does go offline because of the latency swing, we are still running health checks on it. And every time we get a health check packet from the other side, we're testing the latency to see if it swings back under that threshold we've set. Once it does, it seamlessly goes back into the SpeedFusion VPN and everything continues as before. You're manually defining again that threshold here. Now, the customized suspension time. If a tunnel is really having a lot of packet loss, you are suspending it until things calm down, for lack of a better word, and setting that millisecond threshold manually. Now, we do generally recommend keeping it as small as you can, and usually the minimum should be the RTT. Now, the late cutoff latency and packet loss do pull back time on transmit. Now, if you want them to have the effect in both directions, you got to mirror the settings on both piers of the tunnel. And again, setting it here. The next group of settings you'll find in the help icon for the overall PEP-VPN profile itself. First up, the IP type of service field. Doesn't really come into play a lot, but what this does is allow application packets to not be encrypted once it hits the tunnel. The example here, they're talking about when you have both VoIP and data on a particular network and are wanting to have the VoIP traffic prioritized when going through the tunnel. Now, if you are using a non-Peplink gateway for QoS, here's the cool part, that setting isn't stripped when it's repackaged into the tunnel. So what I mean is this, as you can see here, we have our network behind the TOS applicator where they go ahead and apply the QoS to things. It is then sent through SpeedFusion to the other side and the remote network. Those settings do stay throughout. They're not stripped when the packet is encrypted. Our latency difference cutoff, we talked about a little bit earlier of setting a latency threshold on things, and then what this does is it gives you a little bit of a buffer, for example. So if the lowest latency of a connection, for example, is 100 milliseconds, and then if you have defined a difference cutoff of 500, that means it would be 600 milliseconds for it to be removed from the tunnel. This is the big one, setting up multiple tunnels between two concurrent sites. This is, in essence, outbound policies within SpeedFusion, which we weren't really capable of before. Because what we're doing is we're creating sub-tunnels, sub-SpeedFusion tunnels within the overall profile. You can create up to 5 of them. And what this allows you to do, and again, these are to the same remote location, which we weren't able to do before, and each of those subtunnels have different priority values that you can assign using different WAN connections, disabling or enabling WAN smoothing to a particular tunnel, setting a bandwidth limitation for each of the tunnels are just a few of the things you can get up and running. Once you enable the option, you're going to see then sub-profiles added onto the screen. Now, these sub-profiles, once you have everything configured, can be selected when doing outbound policy. You'll see them on the drop-down here. This allows you, for example, to send print traffic over the slower ones, video and VoIP over the most consistent or the least latency connections, or enable some of those settings specific to whatever application that you're looking for. This is basically quality of service over the SpeedFusion VPN. NAT Mode version 2 basically is now able to set up connections both as a many to one NAT, where the remote unit VPN is assigned from the address in the local server. We already talked about this a bit. But what you can also do now is a one-to-one NAT. What I mean now is as of firmware 7.10. The subnet gets replaced by a virtual network that you could apply those rules and applications for. You set this up again under network, LAN, the help icon next to static routing, and then this is actually going to replace the NAT mode that we talked about before, like I said. So again, the subnet of the remote peer is going to be replaced by a virtual network, and that replaces the OSPF routing for all of those connections. Site A only sees Site B and the Site C virtual network address. Now that router address actually has been changed also, and the clients can be reached by their virtual network address because the Peplink in play is doing that translation for you. Now again, this contrasts with, for like a regular NAT, it does that client-server situation where the clients on one side can't be reached unless you're setting up your inbound port forwarding to hit them manually. Whereas with one-to-one NAT, our NAT mode version 2, we get past it because the Peplink is going to be doing the heavy lifting. Each of the client's IP addresses are keeping their host ID, while the network ID is what's getting replaced. This is a big change and a big deal. All right, so after all of that, you have your tunnel established, up and running, and passing traffic. You'll be able to keep an eye on things from the status tab off of the dashboard of the particular Peplink and be able to drill in accordingly. So now we talked about how to set the tunnel up, how to get things up and running that way. A few recommendations that we give as a general guideline to make sure you're getting the most out of it is number one, using WAN connections from different ISPs, different carriers in the tunnel. This comes into play a lot with cellular. For example, our HD devices, and you have 4 Verizon SIM cards in there, for example. Well, if the carrier is going to have an issue, you're dead in the water because you don't have that redundancy built into it. Using WAN connections with similar bandwidth profiles. This goes back to what I had mentioned a bit earlier. Similar speed, similar latencies to get the most out of aggregation. If we're not going for the aggregation profile, we do have a bit more wiggle room here, but as a general rule of thumb, try to keep things as consistent as possible. Try to keep the latency difference, related to that, and try to keep it under 150 milliseconds. That's kind of our general rule of thumb of where things can get a little skewed depending on what connections are in play. And that try to keep the latency for each WAN link, generally speaking, under 800 as well. And also, oversubscription basically means deploy the appropriate product when you're setting things up and running. We do have the tunnels rated for different speeds. Basically, the bigger the box, the more you can put into it. In addition, depending if you are looking for a hub and spoke, for example, you're going to want to ensure that middle point is going to be big enough to handle those remote connections coming in. This brings me to the end of my talk today, guys. Thank you very much for letting me educate you a bit further on some of the hidden portions of what SpeedFusion can bring to your network. And Julie, I am absolutely open for questions.
Thank you very much, Jason, for that wonderful presentation. And yes, it looks like we do have a couple questions. I'll get started here with this first one. Can you tell us a little bit about technical and customer service support and the hours of operation that Peplink can be reached?
Sure. The sales and support team is based here in Moorhead, Minnesota. On the site is where we certainly have the ability to go ahead and get those support tickets turned in. Generally speaking, the way we do it is you do got to be a direct customer to tag us direct. Otherwise, you would route through your appropriate point of sale for that initial contact, Microcom and their subsidiaries. The U.S. office is open from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. We do also have a very active forum community, forum.peplink.com, where we have power users, engineers, and the support staff as well are going in there and trying to help as much as possible. Our social media presence is getting actually ramped up quite a bit, and I've been told they've taken some basic troubleshooting questions there as well. The short answer is one way or the other will get you what you need.
Thank you, Jason. I'll go on to the next question here. Someone from our sales department was inquiring if we were interested to see any Peplink team member in person. Are there any industry-related events within the next few months, such as maybe trade, like that?
Possible. I do know we did have a bunch of the support guys down in San Antonio there was a big trade show down there roughly 3 weeks, a month ago. We also had one in Hong Kong at the end of November. I actually got to go to that one. It was my first time, and I was very excited. Yes, there are possibilities all the time. Of course, better if you're close to us, so we can drive easier. But it'd be a case of going through your account, like the account reps, and conversations can be had.
Great, thank you very much for that. Does InControl support third-party devices as well? And if not, will it show up at all?
No, it's InControl 2 is Peplink only. I mean, it's our monitoring and management tool. That being said, I do know about the closest you'd probably get is I think we are starting to add a little more to IPsec termination with the internet option, basically the template config build that you can push down. But again, I would be stunned if InControl 2 started to support non-Peplink gear. I just don't see it happening.
Okay, thank you. Next question here. Is there a manual configuration for the user to set the Speed Fusion to connect to multiple connections, or is it automatically set up?
That goes back to what I was showing, what we went through a bit earlier in the talk. To set up Speed Fusion, there are two ways to go about it. Whether you use the IC2 build or going into, just taking a sec to scroll back to it, the UI of the units themselves. So will this, I think as far as to answer the automation question, I think that approach is going to be going through IC2 eventually. And it is fairly quick at this point. I mean, again, you're just clicking, filling in a few minor boxes and drop-down boxes. It goes up fairly quick if you keep it basic. And then manually, of course, it's a little more involved because you are manually touching each endpoint. But will it happen? It wouldn't surprise me. Can we do it currently? Unfortunately not.
Thank you for that, Jason. Next question here. You may have covered this already, but I'm going to ask, do the routers have QoS functionality?
Yeah, absolutely. We do application level QoS, both inside and, as we talked about today, inside the tunnel. You can also set up, as long as everybody is on current hardware builds and current firmware, we do have the ability to set up % of available bandwidth on the IP or the user level. So basically we have 3 groups available: manager, staff, and guest, and you set your applicable LAN IPs to one of those 3 groups. Once you have the group put together, then you can go one of a couple of ways, whether it's setting a % of total available bandwidth for everybody for that particular group, or bandwidth capping for everybody in that, everybody gets 10 meg up, 10 meg down. There's a couple of ways to go about it.
Thank you for that, Jason. Can you give us a quick overview on where your Peplink products are manufactured?
Sure. We're a global company. They primarily, so manufacturing is primarily both in Taiwan and Hong Kong.
Jason, thank you so much for answering all of those questions, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to contact our sales rep, or you can email us at sales@microcomtech.com. If you wish to view any of the products mentioned or shown here today, please visit us at www.microcom.us. And also please remember this webinar presentation has been recorded and it will be uploaded to our Microcom YouTube channel so you can view it again. Jason, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it so very much, and I hope you have a great day today.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Thanks so much for letting me talk to everybody today, guys. Have a good one.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.